Hello everyone, and welcome to this time together on Thursday the 16th of July. Last Sunday's Gospel reading was taken from Matthew, and he talks in the familiar voice of a parable or an image to explain a meaning. And in this particular part of Matthew's Gospel, he gives what we know as the parable of the sower. But there are many other parables, as you know, in the Gospels. And we use the same imagery today, don't we? 2,000 years after Christ was using them, we still use that imagery. We tell a story using images to explain what we might mean. And the manager of Manchester United, no, not the darts team Manchester United, which is particularly famous, I know that, but the football team. They play in Old Trafford sometimes. So Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, or something or other, might sometimes describe his team's performance as it was like watching paint dry. Or in other graphic terms, too harsh for our delicate ears today. Sharp and vivid comparisons like this help us to understand in just a few words something that a plain summary couldn't possibly achieve. And we, every day, don't we? We use sayings ourselves like, "Oh, I'm spitting feathers," to express a thirst, or prodigal son as well, for such a one when he comes home. And prodigal son, as you well know, is a vivid analogy taken, of course, from a parable, a story metaphor told by Jesus. This is part of our language and gives it vitality and colour, even though sometimes that colour may be blue at times. And I'm back on the topic of football managers again, I think. I know that Manchester United play in red and City play in blue. But if we are to grasp the full richness available in stories or parables or metaphors, particularly the parables that Jesus used, we have to delve a little deeper into what is being conveyed. There are one or two religious aspects, of course, as you would expect, to the use of parables by Jesus. For instance, very strict Christians at different stages of the church's history considered the use of this kind of imagery completely and utterly unacceptable, because they held the view, because in the Old Testament there is a command that God's people should have no graven images, and they thought that such a command included not only statues and pictures, but also verbal images as well. So, against this argument, Christians who thought that God could only be known through describing him in imagery as being like this or like that. So there's two contrasting opinions, you see, about the use of imagery. There's a lovely example, a lovely early example of this difference of opinion. When John Bunyan in 1678 wanted to defend his book, The Pilgrim's Progress, because the Puritans at the time, you see, were criticizing his use of liking God to this or that. He wrote in the preface to the book what I think is a wonderful piece of poetry. An author's apology for his book. But must I want solidness, because by metaphors I speak? Were not God's laws, his gospel laws, in olden times held forth by shadows, by types and metaphors? Yet loath will any sober man be to find fault with them, lest he be found to assault the highest wisdom. No, He rather stoops and seeks to find out what by pins and loops, by calves and sheep, by heifers and rams, by birds and herbs, and by the blood of lambs, God speaketh to him. And happy is he that finds the light and grace that in them be. You see, Bunyan's aim in the Pilgrim's Progress was that he should be a teacher and an evangelist. And as he says in the poem, by use of calves and sheep, and by birds and herbs, and by blood of lambs, etc., Jesus himself teaches us how to understand the religious meaning. And therefore, he is saying that the use of parable is a good teaching tool for all generations. It is actually an essential part of the way God addresses us now. We experience Christ's own language of what God is like most powerfully in the parables. Words like, the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed, or the kingdom of heaven is like yeast that woman took and mixed. So Christ opens up for us the very nature of God, who is by his nature is incomprehensible to us in any other form other than in the parable or story of likeness. The parable of the mustard seed is recorded in the Gospels of Matthew and Mark and Luke, and its companion, the parable of the yeast, is only found in Matthew and Luke. And Matthew places the parables as part of the teaching of Jesus by Lake Galilee, and the well-known parable of the sower is also included in this part of his Gospel. Luke places the parables at different places and time. Wherever they are placed, they give us a glimpse of the mystery of God and his work behind the ordinary things of everyday life. The mustard seed, the smallest of seeds, like the new Christian, grows to astonishing heights. The seed is a symbol of new life out of death. It is a symbol of resurrection. The symbolism is true both in the Jewish tradition and also in the Christian writings. The seed is a symbol of new life out of death. A new life after its own death deep in the soil. The yeast becomes one with the bread which it creates. So also does God permeate wholly and mysteriously into our everyday lives. You see, the ordinariness of the seed and the yeast are transformed by the nature of God into something miraculous, happening all around us all of the time. And through these parables of the mustard seed and the yeast and the sowers and others, we are given a vision of God alive and working in us. God creates, God permeates right through us. And we can only get the odd, tiny understanding of the nature of God himself through the use that is made particularly, but not exclusively, by Jesus in parables such as these.